Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if Russia had a colony in Africa. There was the scramble of Africa, and it was done by most of the European powers, and only a few states remained partially independent in Africa, being Liberia and Ethiopia. But Ethiopia was promised to Italy, but as we all know, Italy failed to invade it in the first time. Ethiopia will become an important country in this alternate timeline. Now let's ask ourselves, why didn't Russia establish colonies in Africa? There are a few cases for that, and a few very good arguments why it never happened. First of all, Russia didn't have a nice report, except for the ones in the Black Sea and in the Far East. Yes, you also had a port in the Baltics, but sometimes during winter it would also not be ice-free. Russia would need to pass through too many countries, creating problems also with the supply lines. One such country would have been the Ottoman Empire, who could easily cut off any of the supply lines for the Russians. Russia already tried to have a colony in Africa, Madagascar to be more precisely, but it was a failure. And once something fails and it was too expensive, well, the chances are much higher that it won't happen again. And the fourth point is that just like Austria-Hungary, Russia's expansionism was focused towards its neighbors. Getting a colony in Africa would pose a significant challenge and perhaps even a national embarrassment if something could have gone the wrong way. However, Russia participated in an important conference which defined the scramble of Africa, and that was the Berlin Conference. As some of you may know, that conference was crucial in defining the borders of the African continent. But Russia never got a colony during that conference. But what if all of that changed? What if Russia had a colony in Africa? First of all, let's start with an important detail. Ethiopia. Ethiopia was technically considered an Orthodox country. This is an interesting detail for Russia, and perhaps some Russian politicians, they would come up with a strategy. Instead of colonizing large parts of the African continent, like most of the Europeans would intend to do, Russia would perhaps only need a small part of Africa from which they could access Ethiopia. This alternate plan would then be to turn Russia into some sort of protective power over Ethiopia, and Ethiopia could become a Russian protectorate. Instead of France getting Djibouti, it would have been Russia just after the Berlin Conference. As a result, Nikolai Ivanovich Achinov would probably never set up New Moscow in Sagalo, which is in modern-day Djibouti, but he would have been sent to Russian Djibouti as perhaps the first settler or someone who later on may even be able to become a governor, and perhaps he could successfully establish ties between Russia and Ethiopia. Yes, France would be a bit pissed about it, but the Franco-Russian alliance would still happen, and Russia may even give the French special rights within Djibouti. Russia would solve several problems such as supply lines getting there and isolation by having an alliance with the French, the proximity with Ethiopia and Russian settlers. It is very likely that prisoners and some people of minorities would also be sent over there, because very often this is just something that would happen, like in many colonies and also in many parts that were conquered, or many parts such as Siberia for instance. Well, prisoners, they were sent over there to be isolated from the rest of the society. But everything would change for Djibouti with World War I. Why is that? The Ottomans had finally blocked the passage from the Black Sea for good. Russia lost many battles and the political turmoil was rampant. The Russian Revolution would still break out and we would see the Bolsheviks taking power in Russia except for one territory, and that would be Djibouti. I believe that the Tsar or someone of his family would manage to escape over there through Central Asia and especially with the assistance of Britain. Ethiopia too would be furious after hearing what the Bolsheviks have done and would most likely also support the Tsar's family settling in Djibouti. France too, as they considered Russia still an ally, would support the White Army or, well, the true Russian government. The successor of Tsar Nicholas II would have to give away some concessions to the French, British and have to see probably eye to eye with Ethiopia. A huge wave of white immigrants would also come to Djibouti, turning it into a region with a white majority. I'm not talking of white immigrant majority, but white people or European majority or Russian-speaking majority. Any leftist sympathizer would have been killed or simply put into prison. But France and UK would push the alternate Tsar to accept the constitutional monarchy form. Over the next years, Djibouti would become an important trade hub. Trade between Ethiopia, the different colonies, Asia, the Arab world would bring a lot of money in there, and with a highly educated class, many white immigrants they were educated, Djibouti could become a very functional colony, but it would basically become its own country. Yes, the ties with Russia they would still exist, culturally speaking and also linguistically, but in an economical and geographical as well as political way, Djibouti they would just do it their own thing. The Soviet Union at first they would not really care much about Djibouti, but as they would finally have a hold over most of the territory, that is in Europe and Asia, they would send protest notes and complain to the French and the UK for their support of this Tsar that is in there in Djibouti. A Soviet invasion of Djibouti, however, would still be very unlikely. A turning point would be the Second Italian-Ethiopian War. The Russian Tsar would not be able to intervene because he would probably send some soldiers who would support the Ethiopian army, but declaring war on the Italians would just be a suicide mission for the size of Djibouti. The Ethiopian army may fare a little bit better, but it would not be enough to beat the Italians. However, in this timeline, Haile Selassie would not go to England into exile, but to Djibouti. And the Italians would probably not want to take over Djibouti as they couldn't risk a war with the Soviets if they would have felt that it was an aggression on their territory, or even the Allies because they protected the Russian Tsar. And with the outbreak of World War II, Djibouti would also side with the Allies against the Axis. As for the German-Soviet non-aggression pact, they would not distance themselves from it, because everything what the Soviets did was not in the name of the true Russian government, which would reside in Djibouti in that timeline. The partition of Eastern Europe between Nazi Germany and Soviet Union would not really be an important issue in that moment for the truly Russian government in Djibouti. And all the efforts of Djibouti and the Russian Tsar, they would just be like a drop on the hot stone. But the Russian Tsar would position himself with the West and become staunchly pro-Western. Djibouti and Ethiopia would also become very close to each other and have a somewhat similar relation as OTL's Belgium and Luxembourg, for instance, or Romania and Moldova. The famines in Ethiopia wouldn't be that bad thanks to the support of a more developed Russian Djibouti, and the rebellions in Eritrea they could also be quelled with the assistance of Russian Djibouti. One thing that Djibouti would not be able to do would be to stop the revolution happening in Ethiopia. Ethiopia under Haile Selassie would not change much of their politics, and the problems, especially the internal ones, they would remain, leading to the coup of the Derg in 1974. Russian Djibouti would be in a complicated situation. Not only was their most important ally gone, but also Somalia was already in 1969 turning communist. With the Red Terror and the Ogaden War between Ethiopia and Somalia, Russian Djibouti would also get involved into this whole conflict. The Soviets in our timeline, they sent a huge military support to Ethiopia in OGL, and by doing so, they would also invade Djibouti, establishing order in there. The resistance to the Soviets would be huge. The Russians who lived in Djibouti were really anti-communist to the core. Maybe the involvement of the Soviets would take a little bit longer in Eastern Africa, but the Tsardom would cease to exist for some time at least. The Soviets would not go very harsh on Djibouti, but most specialists, the Tsar, would already have left Djibouti, and the trade in Djibouti would then cease to exist. A huge Soviet military base would also be built, Ethiopia would become more stable, Somalia would have more problems with the fall of communism, and it is very likely that the Tsar and some former inhabitants of Russian Djibouti, they would then return. The Soviets would only have ruled in there for a maximum of 10 years. Would Djibouti decide to stay within the Russian Federation? Would the Russian Federation accept the Tsar, who ruled for many decades over Djibouti? Or would Djibouti become an independent Russian-speaking monarchy, a one-of-a-kind thing? It would, after all, have a chance of becoming something like African Singapore. And that's where we leave it for now.
That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.